Hello and welcome to Uncommon Law, my podcast about true stories from my life experience of over 50 years as a lawyer and trial judge. This is a look at the law from the inside out, stuff they don't teach in law school. This is Judge Rudy Greco, retired justice of the New York State Supreme Court. I first saw Joey. He was holding court. He had an audience, and he was giving them his stand-up routine, jokes, wisecracks, mimicking people. All the while he was pushing a mop. The problem was he had an audience, but the audience consisted of his fellow prisoners, corrections officers, the warden, and myself, who was the latest in a long line of lawyers who represented Joe. The scene was the lounge area of the prison, New York State facility in Staten Island at Arthur Kill, which is on the far end of Staten Island, right across from Bayonne, New Jersey, and adjacent to a giant marshland and the biggest garbage dump ever in the history of the city of New York. And Joey was there, and as I said, he was the center of attraction, a lot of fun, a jovial guy, and it was nice to meet him. He got a big personality. And obviously, everybody was very fond of Joe. He was one of the most popular guys in the jail. He was, the class clown, if you will, and kept things light. Joey had been, at that point in time, had just finished just about 5 years on a 7-year New York State sentence, and he was already knew that he was being paroled. He had been before the New York State parole people, and they gave him a date, which was about a month off from when I was visiting him. And his problem was that he also had involvement with the feds in federal court, and there was a warrant out, a holding warrant for him, what they call is a detainer, which meant that when he was released from New York State custody, U.S. Marshals were going to be there and take him into federal custody, and they would transport him across the scenic harbor to Manhattan, where he would be held at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, which is the nearest local federal facility. And there he would wait for a federal parole hearing. And the problem is the federal parole hearing was about 30 days off or so, or in the very near future, maybe 5 weeks, or just before, actually within the next 30 days. And it was all a matter of timing. Joey had plans to make federal parole. He thought he was an automatic, which wasn't the case, but he thought it was automatic, it was just a formality. And the idea was, could I get him a hearing before the United States Parole Board when they met in Manhattan? And the deal is this: the parole board is divided into 3 regions, I believe, nationally. I'm not sure 100%, but Eastern, Central, and Western United States. And the Eastern Parole Board rides a circuit from Florida all the way up to Maine. And the circuit takes about 3 months to complete. They go periodically from place to place and conduct the hearings. So if Joey made this hearing, the next one was right in Manhattan, right across the river, and he got what he thought was an automatic okay for parole, he would be out without further ado, without spending any extra time. If he missed that date, he would be doing as much as another 3 months, waiting for the circuit to come around back to New York. And the stakes were a little higher than he thought, because in point of fact, I found out later when I researched his case and his background and everything else, he owed a couple of years on the federal sentence, just as he did in New York. And it wasn't automatic. He could be held for as much as 2 more years to finish out his federal sentence. So working backwards, I found out about Joey's background, and he had been a burglar. He did some small robberies, and he had some drug charges. And here he was, approximately 45 years old, having spent more than half his life behind bars. And he was looking to get out. He had a childhood sweetheart waiting for him in Staten Island. And She was divorced. She had children that were grown and nearly grown, and they were going to get married, and Joey was going to start over and have a happy life and live happily ever after, according to him. And things were looking up. So everybody was kind of hot to trot, and there was pressure to get this hearing. The warden, who was a very decent guy and who really liked Joe, everybody liked Joe. He was a popular guy. The warden told me, he said, Counselor, I will, if you can arrange the federal hearing, I will arrange for Joey to be escorted by our own people over to Manhattan to attend the hearing and then be brought back here at our expense. He said the guy's done a lot of time behind bars. He's really harmless. He's a lot of fun. We like him, and I wouldn't mind doing that. He says just as on a humane basis, which I thought was a very, very nice gesture. It's also a tribute to Joey in a way, but also it's a sort of indictment because it tells you how comfortable Joey was behind bars all those years, where he was winning friends and influencing people. I don't know. There's something wrong there. In any event, I contacted the parole people, and they refused to have Joey scheduled at the next hearing within the next couple of weeks before that 30-day supposed deadline, when Joey was going to be released by the states. They kept saying the law is the law, the law is the law. They give me blah blah blah, and Joe has to be in. Your client has to be in federal custody before we have jurisdiction to hear his parole concerns. And I kept trying to prevail on them, but it was going nowhere. Apparently, there was a little glitch here, and I found out when I looked up Joey's records, and then he told me about it. The glitch was years ago when he was in federal custody. He had hatched a scheme. I don't know where he got this, some crazy jailhouse stuff, to subpoena President Richard Nixon. He drew up a subpoena. He was representing himself. In other words, he was pro se, as we say in Latin legal jargon. And he was his own counsel. And he thought somebody told him, put a bug in his bonnet, subpoena Nixon on your case, Joe. And he did. And he put the subpoena out there. And the subpoena went on a big stack of papers for the judge who was overseeing his case to sign. And the judge carelessly signed it without looking at what the papers were, only to find out later on that he had a live subpoena on his hands for the President of the United States in a minor criminal case here in New York. Now, once that subpoena was signed, the judge was really, really embarrassed because the only way it could be quashed was it had to be honored or Joe had to withdraw it. And Joey wasn't withdrawing it. The Fed started putting a lot of pressure on him. You have to do this. You have to withdraw this. What are you, nuts? What are you, crazy? You're this, that, and the other thing. And Joe, being a schemer in jailhouse terms, figured out if they were all upset about this, it must be good for him. It was bad for them. It had to be good for him. And he held out. Now they started to portray him. They tried to portray him as a crazy, somebody who was off his rocker. He was far from it. He was cunning. That's all he was. He was cunning, but he wasn't crazy. And while he was in federal custody, he was visited by two federal agents, two FBI guys. So the FBI, when they interview people, they always come in pairs. And there's a reason. One of them questions you, and the other one is a witness. Should you lie to an FBI agent in their questioning, you're guilty of perjury as if you had been a sworn witness in a courtroom. And that could be big trouble. And for reference, you can go to Martha Stewart's case. Martha Stewart was wanted for questioning by the FBI. She was represented by, I'm not sure, it might have been her son-in-law, but it was a relative who was a lawyer but not experienced, certainly in criminal law or in federal criminal law. He walks Martha Stewart in to meet the agents. And first mistake, strike one, he allows her to talk to the agents. Strike two, she lies or allegedly lies while talking to them. Strike three, she's in jail for years teaching the other female inmates how to make crumpets and good tea parties, for the next 2 years. That's a big mistake. So these two agents, the reason why they could go see Joe was he was representing himself. He was his own lawyer. He didn't have a lawyer. And they had an ulterior motive. They were after organized crime people, and they wanted Joe's testimony and information that he might have about former cellmates. Over the course of the years in his federal stint in prison, he had been roommates or friends with a number of organized crime figures. So they started talking, and they wanted information about these people. So they started talking to Joe about captains and lieutenants and soldiers. And Joe, ever the jokester, he says, I was never in the Army. I don't know what you guys are talking about. And they were not happy with that. And not happy with that is not a good thing to be with the FBI or the federal agents. And that's on his record. So I thought maybe eventually that was the thing that was clogging up the system. But Joe, in the meantime, finally resolved the whole question. And the scheme worked out. He ended up getting a bargain. In return for quashing or withdrawing the subpoena on his own volition, he ended up getting the feds to give him a sentence that would run concurrently with the state sentence he was now doing. And he got a 2-for-1, and here he was now looking to reconcile both of these things and time up the parole hearing so he could be out and married and off on the rest of his life. And that was my problem. So I made an appointment. I was getting nowhere fast with the local people. And I made an appointment with the director of the whole East Coast Parole. Actually, not the director, but counsel to the director for the East Coast Parole Board. And I went down to Philadelphia. I got my brother Bobby to come with me so I could review the case and he could keep me company on the drive down to Philly. And we went and I met with the counsel for the East Coast Parole Board. And he was cold potatoes. He didn't want to hear anything about this. He was just telling me, I'm sorry, I can't help you. There's no humane consideration, nothing at all. And I keep thinking it might have been Joey's past record of being difficult with that Nixon subpoena, which was holding him up. But he said, I can't help you, and I don't have to give you a reason. And he was kind of snide about the whole thing. And I thought it was out of line. So the more he insisted, the more I persisted. And I said, you know what? You're not interested. I'm going to go see the director. I want to see your superior. And he said, you can't see my superior. You can't do it. Meanwhile, the superior, the director for the whole East Coast, his office was just adjacent to the office I was sitting in. So I got up. I said, you know what? I'm going to walk in there and I'm going to talk to your superior because I'm not getting anything out of you. Well, this guy got furious. He got up and started cursing and berating me, this, that, and the other thing. Meanwhile, my brother's keeping a close eye on this guy. The guy makes a tragic mistake. He comes toward me and grabs me by the lapels of my sincere blue suit. And I quickly winked at my brother. And I suppressed my primal instinct, to punch this guy out. And I looked at him and I did my best Clint Eastwood imitation in a low, almost whispered voice. I said, my friend, you just made a crucial mistake. This is the biggest mistake you've ever made in your life. And the guy turned green and he realized I'm staring at him. And I said, now keep your hands off me or I'm going to forget that I'm a lawyer. He dropped his hands. He was mortified because I imagine he had visions of losing his job and his pension, the God Almighty pension. He was in trouble. He knew he had overstepped his boundaries and this was serious business. Well, we walked out. The director never showed. I don't even think the director was there because all of this ruckus took place right outside his open doorway. I don't even think the guy was there. And my brother and I laughed all the way home thinking about this moron, and how he overstepped his boundaries and how it might, inure to our benefit, somewhere down the line. Well, Joey didn't get the New York City parole date. He was paroled by the New York State authorities. And as I said, he was picked up by federal marshals. They took him to the Metropolitan Correctional Center downtown Manhattan, where he stayed for a couple of days. And they shipped him to the federal penitentiary at Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, about 70 miles north of Harrisburg, right in central Pennsylvania. And lo and behold, I get a notice that Joey is up for the next parole hearing, which is coming up only days after I got the notice in Lewisburg. Apparently, the circuit was working its way up, and Lewisburg might have been the next stop or the stop after New York. And the thought arose in my mind that this was on purpose. They took him from New York City correctional facility, a federal facility, and they shipped him to Pennsylvania because I thought that this counsel for the parole board must have had a hand in this. He was trying to mitigate the situation and calm things down, by giving Joey a prompt hearing at the next stop on the circuit. Regardless, I got my friend Gino to keep me company and drive with me to Pennsylvania. I always needed company on these drives because I'm reviewing the papers as I go. And we arrive at Lewisburg. And finally, when we get to Lewisburg, we're escorted to the subterranean depths. Lewisburg is a Civil War era prison, and it looks like the whole place looks like a dungeon. It's really antiquated. It's clean, it's spotless, but it's old and it's ominous. So Gino and I get escorted down a couple of flights to the sub basement or something like that, and there's a waiting room, and it's stark, and nobody's in the waiting room except us. And then the door opens to the waiting room, and in comes Joe, escorted by a couple of correction officers, federal correction officers, and they sit him down, they uncuff him. He's not going anywhere. They're blocking the doorway, and where's he going to run? He's in the middle of a prison anyway, and he's up for parole, so he's going to be on his best behavior. He's going to be like like the tooth fairy here. He's going to be a good boy. So we sat down and we're waiting, and it's a stark, dark place, and I think they must choose this place on purpose because it's really overbearing, and this will humiliate you if you have a big ego. You see this place, it's what the hell is going on? This is right out of the Spanish Inquisition. Right in front of us, eventually a giant oak door opens, and a guy calls Joe's name and my name, come in, and points us into the room. We leave Gino in the waiting room, and we go into the hearing room, where it's another stark room. There's just a simple table with 3 seats and 3 hearing officers there from the parole board. And then, of course, there's a guard, and they have a tape recorder. And then there are 2 chairs in front of the table, and Joe sits in one, and I sit in the other one. And I make my pitch for why he deserves parole. And of course, as I said, this is not going to be automatic. If they want to be nasty, they can hold him. Parole is not a right. Parole is a legislative grace. And the parole board, they can be bent. The rules are almost a joke because they can do almost anything without any consequences. And very often they allow themselves to be used by other federal agencies as leverage against people. You want to make parole, then you better cooperate. You better do this, or we'll put a bad word in. And the parole board allows themselves to be used that way. So I don't have a lot of regard for them. But you're at their mercy, so you better have a lot of regard for them. So it's a mixed bag. Anyway, I make my pitch. Joe makes his pitch. They ask him to tell why he should be released, and they send us out because ostensibly they're going to have a conference and they're going to decide his fate. So we go back into the room and we're waiting 10 minutes. And over the course of that 10 minutes, which seemed like 10 years, I made sure I've got Joe. I said, Joe, no matter what, if it's a bad decision, no matter what they say, however negative it is, don't you do anything but be a perfect gentleman and say thank you. That's all you're going to do. Please, Joe, don't do this because you're going to have another hearing, and I don't want something you're acting up at this one to be held against you for the next hearing, which will come, and you're at their mercy. He says, Rudy, I have it. I got it. I know. He says, don't worry. No matter what they say, I'm going to be, I'll be cool. I'm just going to say thank you. I said, all right, Joe, let's go. Sure enough, they call us, and now my knees are knocking. I'm sure Joe's knees were knocking. They call us in for the decision. We both sit down. And the chairman, he starts speaking, and he starts with the litany of Joe's record and all the bad things on Joe's record. And so I'm saying to myself, uh-oh, this is not good. This is not good. And I'm hoping, Joe, I hope he just holds his temper and, doesn't explode or do anything or get angry or anything like that. And he was cool. And at the end of this long negative litany, the chairman of the commission says, and therefore, under all the circumstances, it is a decision of this parole board to release you forthwith. Whoa! I'm happy. And I say, thank you, thank you. Joe said, I want to thank you very much for your decision. I promise I won't let you down. And we both get up, and we're escorted out of the room. I walk out first, and Joe is behind me. And Gino later told me, he said, you had to see Joe's face walking behind you. Because when he came out of that room, he went in there like he had 1,000 pounds on his shoulders. He came out, he was walking on air with a smile a mile wide. He was transformed. He said, and that's what you did. He said, that's what that decision did for him. And he was so happy. He says, I've never seen anything like it. And I thought that was pretty good. That was pretty gratifying. And that made the ride home a lot easier. I can say that. A couple of days later, Joe was released. And he goes home. And he gets married within the next couple of weeks. And about a month later, I called him up. One of my clients was a Teamster organizer. Uncle Mersh had been a Teamster organizer. It turns out I told him the story. And Mersh says, I remember, Joe, I did time with him. He said, 20 years ago. He says he was a kid. He was a terrific kid. He was the life of the party. He was a lot of fun, this, that, and the other thing. He said, listen, talk to him. Have him come here. He says, and sit down with us for a couple of minutes, and I'll get him a union card, as a concrete truck driver. Now, those jobs they're great jobs. That's a great, blue collar job. People with clean records can't get that job. There's no automatic. It's a good job. He can make a nice living and have a nice life. Well, 3 different appointments. Joey broke them all. We gave up. Moish and I both gave up. We said, the heck with it. If he's not coming, he's not coming. 3 years later, Joey's on the front page of all the tabloids, the News, the Post, the Mirror, all of this stuff. It seems that he was involved in a stick-up of a motel in Bayonne, New Jersey, with 3 other guys in a car. The cops were in hot pursuit over the Bayonne Bridge. They were driving off over the Bayonne Bridge. One of the kids in the car turns around and fires back at the cops, hitting a cop right in the neck with a shot. Miraculously, thank God. The thing did no damage except go through. It didn't cut any arteries, didn't break any bones, didn't break his spine, nothing. It just went right through one end of his neck, out the other end of his neck, and did minimal harm under the circumstances, which I thought was fantastic as far as I was concerned. I felt sorry for the poor cop, but, I started to think, the parole board, maybe they weren't that harsh after all, Maybe they knew something I didn't know. Anyway, Joey calls me up one day after the newspaper headlines, and he was his usual charming self. Oh, my God, they're trying to crucify me, Rudy. Oh, I got wrapped up with these stupid kids, these hooples, these crazy kids. They suddenly decide to rob this motel, and then this jerk shoots the cop, and here I am all jammed up. You got to help me. I said, no, Joe. No. Forget my number, Joe. I'm not helping you. I said, you didn't show up. You had a chance to do things the right way, and you didn't show up, Joe. So now, Joe, all you wanted to do was start over. Well, now you're starting over, but it's back in jail. And you know something? It's going to be great. Jail is wonderful. Don't forget, Joe, you don't have to make any decisions over there. All you have to do is push them up and make jokes, have fun. Everybody loves you. You don't have any of the difficulties. You don't have to pay bills. You don't have to figure out what things cost. You don't have to get a place to live. You don't have to hold a job. You don't have to do anything. You just go back. Joe, you're going home. Be it ever so humble, Joe, there's no place like home. Thanks for listening. Come back next week for another episode of Uncommon Law, lessons they don't teach in law school. I'm Judge Rudy Greco. Court is adjourned.